The house was always too cold. That was the first thing I noticed when I moved in, and it was the thing I still noticed every single morning, 2 years later. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, kept the thermostat set to a brisk 66 degrees. She called it crisp. I called it a constant bone-deep ache in my joints. I pulled my knitted cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the blue one Harold had bought for me our last Christmas together, and stepped softly out of the guest room, or rather, the bonus room, as Jessica liked to remind me it was originally intended to be. The hardwood floors were freezing through my slippers. I walked down the long, cavernous hallway of their suburban Illinois home, careful to step on the edges of the floorboards where they were less likely to creak. At 68 years old, I had mastered the art of moving like a ghost in a house that belonged to my own son. The kitchen was a sprawling expanse of white marble, stainless steel, and aggressive minimalism. There wasn't a single photograph on the refrigerator, not one magnetic clip holding a grandchild's drawing or a grocery list. Jessica preferred clean surfaces. Everything had its place, and increasingly, I felt like I did not. I reached for my favorite mug, a chipped, hand-painted ceramic cup I'd bought on a road trip to Sedona 30 years ago. I opened the cabinet where I always kept it, right next to the sleek, matching espresso cups Jessica had ordered from Italy. My mug wasn't there. I frowned, pushing aside the uniform white cups. Nothing. I checked the dishwasher. Empty. A cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. I walked over to the trash can, pressing the foot pedal. There, resting on top of a pile of discarded kale stems and empty Amazon boxes, was my Sedona mug. It wasn't broken. It had simply been thrown away. "Morning, Margaret." Eleanor. My name is Eleanor. But Jessica had slipped up and called me Margaret, the name of her demanding aristocratic mother, so many times that I had stopped correcting her. I turned. Jessica was standing in the doorway, dressed in a sharp beige pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun. She was 39, a senior events manager for a corporate firm, and she treated her home exactly like one of her high-stakes corporate galas, tightly controlled, relentlessly aesthetic, and devoid of actual warmth. "Good morning, Jessica," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I looked back down at the trash can. "My mug," Jessica sighed, an elaborate, exhausted sound that she reserved specifically for me. She walked over to the gleaming espresso machine and began pushing buttons. "Oh, that old thing?" "The glaze was starting to crack, Eleanor. It's unhygienic. Plus, Marie Kondo says if it doesn't spark joy, let it go." I ordered a new set of stoneware mugs from Williams-Sonoma. They should arrive tomorrow. They match the kitchen better. She didn't look at me as she spoke. She was watching the dark espresso drip into her perfectly white cup. "Harold bought me that mug," I said, the words feeling heavy on my tongue, "on our 20th anniversary. And it had a good run," she replied briskly, taking a sip of her coffee. "Anyway, Matthew is running late. He has a breakfast meeting. Could you make sure the dry cleaning is picked up by 3? The receipt is on the counter. And please don't leave your knitting bag on the living room sofa again. We have friends coming over for drinks tonight, and it just looks so cluttered." She didn't wait for an answer. She picked up her leather tote bag, her heels clicking against the hardwood like gunshots, and walked out the door. The heavy front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was suffocating. I stood alone in the perfect, sterile kitchen. I didn't fish the mug out of the trash. If I did, she would only throw it away again, and the humiliation of hiding my own belongings in my son's house was more than I could bear. I simply made a cup of instant coffee in one of her white Italian cups, sat at the edge of the island stool, and watched the gray Illinois sky lighten through the window. How did I end up here? If you had asked me 3 years ago, I would have told you I had a good life. A modest life, but a deeply happy one. Harold and I had been married for 42 years. We lived in a cozy 3-bedroom ranch house. It was filled with mismatched furniture, piles of books, and the smell of cinnamon and roasting chicken. We weren't wealthy. Harold was a high school history teacher, and I worked part-time as a librarian. But we had enough. We paid our bills, we took small vacations, and we poured everything else we had into our only child, Matthew. Matthew was our pride. We paid for his college tuition out of our own pockets so he wouldn't graduate with debt. We helped him with the down payment on his first apartment. When he married Jessica, a woman who made it clear from day one that our middle-class sensibilities were somewhat beneath her, we smiled, held our tongues, and wrote a generous check for their lavish country club wedding. Then Harold got sick. pancreatic cancer. It was fast, brutal, and terrifyingly expensive. Even with Medicare, the out-of-pocket costs, the experimental treatments, the home care, it drained our savings like water through a sieve. When Harold passed away, holding my hand on a rainy Tuesday in November, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was adrift. That was when Matthew stepped in. At the funeral, he had wrapped his arms around me, his eyes red-rimmed, and said the words that sealed my fate. "Mom, you can't stay in that old house alone. It's too much upkeep. Sell it. Come live with us. We have plenty of room. We'll take care of you." It sounded like a lifeline. I was drowning in grief, unable to even look at Harold's empty armchair without breaking down. I agreed. I sold our family home. The proceeds, after paying off the remaining medical debt and the mortgage, weren't massive, about $150,000. I told Matthew I wanted to put it into a high-yield CD, something to generate a little income so I wouldn't be a burden. He had looked at me with an expression of gentle reprimand. "Mom, let me handle the finances. You've been through enough. I'll put it in a secure investment account for you. Just focus on resting." I trusted my son. Why wouldn't I? I signed the papers. I packed 2 suitcases of clothes, a few boxes of keepsakes, and moved into the beige bonus room at the end of their hall. The rest of my life, my furniture, my books, the dining table where we had eaten thousands of family dinners, was either sold or shoved into the dark corners of Matthew and Jessica's 3-car garage. I thought I was moving into a home. I didn't realize I was moving into an institution where I was the only patient, and the staff despised me. The day dragged on. I picked up the dry cleaning. I wiped down countertops that were already clean. I sat in the bonus room and read until the sun began to set. Around 6 o'clock, I heard the front door open. Matthew was home. I stepped out of my room, offering a tentative smile. "Hi, honey. How was your day?" Matthew was shrugging off his coat. At 42, he was starting to look like his father, though he carried himself with a nervous energy Harold never had. He was a regional sales director, always glued to his phone, always chasing the next quarter's targets. "Exhausting," he muttered, not looking up from his screen. "Traffic on the 90 was a nightmare." "I can warm up some dinner for you," I offered. "I made a pot roast." "Jessica ordered sushi," he said distractedly, finally glancing up. "Oh, by the way, Mom, we're having the Millers over tonight. Jessica's trying to land a big contract with his firm. Could you maybe just have dinner in your room tonight? It's going to be a lot of boring business talk." It was a polite dismissal, but a dismissal nonetheless. "Stay out of sight. Don't embarrass us." "Of course," I said smoothly, forcing the corners of my mouth up. "I'm quite tired anyway. I'll just take a plate to my room." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best," he said, already turning away, his mind entirely elsewhere. I went to the kitchen, cut a slice of my own pot roast, put it on a Corelle plate I had saved from my old house, and retreated to my room. I ate in silence, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the confident booming voices of their guests echoing down the hall. It was around 11 p.m. when the guests finally left. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. My throat felt dry. I decided to wait until I was sure Jessica was upstairs before I ventured out to the kitchen for a glass of water. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards cold against my feet again. The lights in the living room were off, but a soft glow spilled from the kitchen island. Matthew and Jessica were still down there. I stopped in the shadows of the hallway, holding my breath, not wanting to interrupt. But then I heard my name. "Can't keep doing this, Matt. It's affecting my mental health." Jessica's voice was a harsh, insistent whisper. She was aggressively wiping down the marble counter with a microfiber cloth. "Jess, come on. It's not that bad. She stays out of your way," Matthew replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He sounded tired, defensive. "She's always there," Jessica snapped, tossing the cloth into the sink. "Creeping around the house like a ghost, leaving her cheap yarn on my Ethan Allen sofa, smelling like mothballs and old lotion. This isn't what I signed up for when we got married." "She's my mother. What am I supposed to do? Throw her out on the street?" "No, we do what we talked about with the financial planner last week." I froze. My hand gripped the edge of the hallway wall so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I don't know, Jess." Matthew rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd had since he was a little boy trying to get out of doing his homework. "Selling this house right now? The mortgage rates are brutal. Which is exactly why we need the equity from this house now. Jessica pushed forward, leaning over the island, her eyes flashing. If we sell, we clear the debt you racked up on those stupid crypto investments. We put down a deposit on the house in Oak Brook, the one in the good school district for when we actually want kids, and we use a fraction of the leftover equity to pay the entry fee for Sunny Pines. Sunny Pines. The name dropped into the quiet kitchen like a lead weight. I knew Sunny Pines. Everyone in the county knew it. It was a state-subsidized, low-income nursing facility out near the industrial park. It smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. It was where families dumped the elderly when they ran out of money and patience. It wasn't a home. It was a waiting room for death. Sunny Pines is rough, Jess, Matthew mumbled, looking away from her. Dad would roll over in his grave. Dad is dead, Matt, Jessica hissed, her patience snapping. And your mother has nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing. The $150,000 she gave you from her house, you blew it. You blew it on day trading, on paying off the lease for my Audi, and covering our lifestyle because your commissions tanked last year. If she ever asks for an accounting of that trust account you supposedly set up, we are ruined. Do you get that? The world tilted. The hallway seemed to stretch and warp around me. My chest tightened so violently I thought I might be having a heart attack. He spent it. The money from the house. Harold's life insurance. The nest egg that was supposed to keep me safe. My son hadn't invested it to protect me. He had stolen it to maintain the illusion of their wealthy, successful suburban life. She won't ask, Matthew said, his voice trembling slightly. She trusts me. She doesn't understand finances anyway. Then we execute the plan, Jessica said, her tone suddenly chillingly calm. She walked over to him, placing a manicured hand on his chest. We get her to sign the power of attorney next week. We tell her it's for, I don't know, a Medicare update. Once you have legal control, we sell this place, move to Oak Brook, and check her into Sunny Pines. We'll visit on holidays. It's the best thing for everyone, babe. We need a fresh start. Matthew stood in silence for a long, agonizing moment. Then slowly he nodded. Okay. Let's call the realtor tomorrow. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I turned around and floated back to the bonus room, completely numb. I closed the door without making a sound. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark. I expected to cry. For 2 years I had cried easily. At commercials, at memories, at the sight of Harold's favorite brand of tea in the grocery store. But tonight, my eyes were dry. The crushing weight of the betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it bypassed sorrow entirely and settled somewhere deep in my bones as a cold, hard stone, my own flesh and blood. My son, whom I had carried, nursed, and sacrificed my entire adult life for, was planning to lock me in a squalid facility to cover up his own theft, and he was going to let his wife coordinate the logistics. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the streetlights flicker against the pavement, replaying the conversation over and over until every word was branded into my memory. She trusts me. She doesn't understand finances. Sunny Pines. When morning broke, the pale light filtering through the blinds, I stood up. My knees popped. My back ached. But the woman who looked back at me in the small vanity mirror was different from the one who had cried over a ceramic mug 24 hours ago. The ghost was gone. I went through the motions of the day with a strange, out-of-body clarity. I made the coffee. I smiled at Jessica when she complained about the weather. I wished Matthew a good day at work. They looked at me with the complacent, slightly irritated expressions they always wore, entirely unaware that the dynamic of the house had irrevocably shifted. Around noon, after the house was empty and silent, I walked down the long driveway to the mailbox. It was a chore Jessica usually demanded I do, insisting the mail carrier always mangled her catalogs if they were left in the box too long. I pulled open the metal door and pulled out the stack. Bills, a glossy catalog from Pottery Barn, a flyer for a local landscaping company, and a thick cream-colored envelope addressed to Mrs. Eleanor S. Vance. Not Margaret, not resident, Eleanor S. Vance. The return address was embossed in thick navy blue ink. Horizon Energy Partners, LLC, Corporate Acquisitions, Houston, Texas. I frowned. I hadn't received mail in my own name in over a year, let alone from a company in Texas. I walked back into the house, sat at the kitchen island, and carefully slid my thumbnail under the flap of the envelope. Inside was a stack of dense, legal-looking documents printed on heavy stock paper and a personalized cover letter. I put on my reading glasses, the cheap drugstore ones, and began to read. Dear Mrs. Vance, we are reaching out to you regarding parcel ID number 884-902, a 40-acre tract of land located in Culberson County, Texas, currently registered under the joint names of Harold M. Vance and Eleanor S. Vance. My breath caught. The Texas land. 40 years ago, when Matthew was just a toddler, Harold had gone through a brief, somewhat ridiculous phase of wanting to live off the grid. He had bought a plot of cheap, arid scrubland in West Texas from a magazine advertisement for practically pennies. We had driven down there once in our old station wagon. It was nothing but dust, tumbleweeds, and blistering sun. I had cried from the heat, and Harold, realizing his pioneer dreams were foolish, had apologized. We drove back to Illinois, stuffed the deed in a shoebox, and kept paying the minimal property taxes every year as a running joke between us about our vacation estate. When Harold died, I had completely forgotten about it. It had been worthless. I continued reading the letter. Following extensive geological surveys commissioned by Horizon Energy Partners, substantial deposits of rare earth elements, specifically neodymium and praseodymium, have been confirmed beneath the aforementioned parcel. As Horizon Energy is currently expanding our extraction operations in the Culberson Basin, we are presenting an aggressive initial cash offer for the full acquisition of the mineral rights and land title of parcel ID number 884-902. I skipped the dense paragraphs of legal jargon, my eyes scanning down to the bolded numbers at the bottom of the page. Proposed purchase price, $8,500,000. $8,500,000. I took my glasses off. I rubbed my eyes. I put the glasses back on and looked again. The zeros hadn't moved. $8.5 million. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands shook so violently the heavy paper rattled against the marble countertop. This was a scam. It had to be a scam. Things like this didn't happen to women like me, women who hid their own mugs in the trash. Women destined for sunny pines. I forced myself to breathe, a deep, shaky inhale, and turned to the second page. It was a formal representation agreement. Please note that Horizon Energy Partners is being represented in this local acquisition by our contracted real estate and asset management firm, Sterling Vance Brokerage, Chicago Division. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Sterling Vance Brokerage. It was the firm Jessica had been talking about at dinner last night. The firm she had hosted the Millers for. The prestigious, cutthroat agency she was desperately trying to sign an event management contract with to save her own failing career metrics. She had spent the last month obsessing over their mystery VIP client, who was about to close a massive land deal, hoping to secure the contract to plan the corporate celebration gala. The VIP client wasn't a tech bro. It wasn't a foreign investor. It was the invisible woman living in the bonus room. I sat at the kitchen island for a long time. The beige walls of Jessica's perfect house seemed to close in around me, but for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel trapped. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of power blooming in my chest. Matthew had stolen my past. Jessica was planning to steal my future. They thought I was an ignorant, helpless old woman whose life could be packed up into a state-run facility to balance their checkbook. They thought they held all the cards. I looked down at the letter from Horizon Energy. Then I looked over at the sleek, minimalist trash can where my Sedona mug was buried. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded different, stronger. "Okay, we'll play." I didn't leave the letter on the counter. I didn't call Matthew to ask for his advice. I carefully folded the thick papers, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked them inside my knitting bag, right beneath a half-finished baby blanket I was making for a charity drive. Then I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out the yellow pages, and began looking for a lawyer. Not a family lawyer, not someone Matthew knew. I needed a shark, and I needed to act fast before my son brought home that power of attorney document. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in my life, I was ready for war. Finding a reason to leave the house without arousing suspicion required the kind of tactical planning usually reserved for military operations. In the 2 years I had lived with Matthew and Jessica, my routine had been relentlessly domestic and entirely predictable. If I suddenly announced I was taking the train into downtown Chicago, Jessica would have interrogated me until I cracked. So I lied. The next morning, while Jessica was aggressively blending a green smoothie, I clutched my knitting bag to my chest and offered a hesitant smile. "I saw a flyer at the library last week," I said, pitching my voice to sound a little frail, a little eager. "A senior knitting circle at the Oak Park Community Center. They meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I thought it might be nice to get out of your hair for a few hours." Jessica stopped the blender. The loud, grinding noise died away, leaving the kitchen in sudden silence. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my worn cardigan and sensible shoes. A flicker of genuine relief passed over her sharp features. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Eleanor," she said, her tone taking on that sickly sweet, patronizing cadence people use when speaking to toddlers or the very old. "Socialization is so important at your age. Cognitive decline happens so fast when you just sit around. Do you need me to order you an Uber? The community center is practically in the next zip code." "Oh no," I said quickly. "There's a bus that stops right at the corner. It goes straight there. I can manage." "If you're sure," she said, already turning her attention back to her phone. "Just make sure you have your location tracking on in your phone settings, in case you get turned around." "Of course," I lied again. An hour later, I was not on a bus to the community center. I was sitting in the back of a taxi, watching the sleek, towering skyline of downtown Chicago rise up against the gray clouds. My phone was powered off and buried at the bottom of my purse. The law offices of Sterling and Associates were located on the 42nd floor of a glass and steel monolith on Wacker Drive. It wasn't the kind of place that advertised on park benches or late-night television. It was the kind of place you only knew about if you had money that needed to be quietly protected from other people with money. When the elevator doors parted, my cheap drugstore shoes sank into plush navy blue carpeting. The receptionist, a young woman in a tailored suit who looked like she belonged on the cover of Vogue, offered me a polite, practiced smile. I must have looked entirely out of place. A tired woman in her late 60s clutching a canvas bag stuffed with yarn, but she didn't blink. "Eleanor Vance," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't have an appointment, but I need to speak with Robert Sterling. It's a matter concerning a rather large acquisition by Horizon Energy." It was a gamble, using the name of the energy company, but it worked. 10 minutes later, I was ushered into a corner office that smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. Robert Sterling was a man in his early 60s with silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the quiet, immovable presence of a mountain. He stood up from behind a massive mahogany desk and gestured to a chair. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Robert. Please have a seat." My receptionist mentioned Horizon Energy. "How can I help you?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I couldn't afford to. I unzipped my knitting bag, bypassed the half-finished baby blanket, and pulled out the thick envelope. I slid it across the polished wood of his desk. 40 years ago, my husband bought 40 acres of dirt in Texas," I said, my voice remarkably calm in the quiet room. "Yesterday, I found out it's sitting on top of rare earth minerals. Horizon Energy wants to buy it for $8.5 million. I need to accept this offer, process the transaction, and secure the funds without my son or my daughter-in-law ever finding out it exists." Robert Sterling opened the envelope. For several long minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp rustle of thick paper as he read through the proposal. He didn't rush. He read every single line. Finally, he set the papers down, took off his reading glasses, and looked at me. There was a new weight to his gaze. "This is a legitimate offer, Mrs. Vance, and a highly aggressive one. They want this land badly," he said softly. "But you are talking about hiding a massive asset from your immediate family. Usually, when a client comes to me with a request like this, they are fleeing a dangerous situation. Are you in physical danger at home?" "No," I said. "Just the financial kind." I told him everything. I told him about Harold's death, about the sale of our family home, about the $150,000 Matthew had supposedly placed into a secure investment account to provide me with a small income. I told him about the conversation I had overheard the night before, the plans to sell the house, the casual mention of Sunny Pines, the revelation that the money was gone. "They are planning to present me with a power of attorney document next week," I finished, my hands folded tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. "If I sign it, they take control of everything I have left, which they believe is nothing, and put me in a state-run facility. If I don't sign it, they will likely try to prove I am mentally incompetent to force the issue. I need an ironclad wall between myself and them, before they make their move." Robert leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was a man who navigated the treacherous waters of family greed for a living. "We can do this," he said finally. "We will establish a revocable blind trust. The trust will legally own the Texas property and, subsequently, the $8.5 million. I will act as the trustee. When the transaction goes through the public records, the buyer will be listed as a corporate entity, not Eleanor Vance. Your name will not exist on any public financial registry regarding this money." "And the taxes?" I asked. "Handled within the trust," he replied. "But Mrs. Vance, before we proceed with the Horizon deal, I need to understand the full scope of your current financial exposure. You mentioned the $150,000 your son took to invest. Do you have any account numbers? Statements? Anything I can trace?" I shook my head, feeling a flush of deep, humiliating shame. "No. He told me it was handled. I trusted him. He's my son." Robert's expression softened just a fraction. "Don't beat yourself up. Elder financial abuse committed by family members is the most common kind, precisely because it relies on trust. Let me do a preliminary sweep right now. With your Social Security number, I can pull a soft inquiry on your credit and see if there are any accounts attached to your name that you might not be aware of." I gave him the number. He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I sat in the suffocating silence of the office, watching the second hand on his grandfather clock sweep away the time. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When Robert finally turned back to me, the professional neutrality had vanished from his face. He looked grim. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice dropping an octave. "I need you to prepare yourself. The conversation you overheard last night? It was worse than you thought." My stomach plummeted. "What do you mean?" "I pulled the history on the wire transfer from the sale of your home 2 years ago," Robert said, pulling up a document on his screen and turning the monitor slightly so I could see the cold, hard numbers. "The money didn't go into a high-yield CD. It didn't go into an index fund or an investment portfolio." "Where did it go?" I whispered. "Matthew transferred the entire sum into a joint checking account under his and Jessica's names," Robert explained, his finger tracing a line on the screen. "Within 48 hours of the deposit, the funds were dispersed into 2 massive payments. The first payment was for $85,000. It was wired directly to the Grand Victoria Casino in Elgin to clear an outstanding line of credit. A gambling marker. The air left my lungs. $85,000. Harold had worked overtime for years to pay off our mortgage. He had graded history papers late into the night, rubbing his tired eyes so we could own our home free and clear. Matthew had blown the equity of his father's life's work at a blackjack table. "And the rest?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from a different room. $60,000 went to a luxury auto dealership in Naperville, a down payment and lease buyout for a white Audi Q7, registered to Jessica Vance. The remaining $5,000 was eaten up by overdraft fees and routine credit card payments over the next month. I closed my eyes. The image of Jessica's pristine, gleaming white SUV parked in the driveway flashed behind my eyelids. Every time she had driven me to the pharmacy, complaining about the cost of gas. Every time Matthew had sighed heavily at the dinner table, talking about how hard he worked to keep a roof over our heads. It was all a lie, a massive, grotesque theater performance constructed on the ashes of my husband's legacy. Matthew hadn't made a bad investment in the stock market. He hadn't been tricked by cryptocurrency like I'd heard him claim to Jessica. He had stolen the money to save his own skin from a casino and bought his demanding wife a luxury car to keep her quiet. And then, having bled me dry, they had moved me into their bonus room, turned down the thermostat, and treated me like a burden they were saintly enough to bear. "Mrs. Vance?" Robert's voice pulled me back to the present. He was watching me carefully, perhaps worried I was going to have a stroke right there in his office. I opened my eyes. The tears I had expected didn't come. The cold, heavy stone that had settled in my chest the night before crystallized. It turned into something hard, sharp, and brilliant, like a diamond. "I'm fine, Robert," I said, and to my surprise, my voice didn't waver at all. "In fact, I think I see things more clearly now than I have in a very long time." "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "Draft the trust," I commanded, sitting up straighter. The ache in my joints seemed to vanish. "Contact Horizon Energy. Tell them my legal representation will handle the negotiations, but we are prepared to move quickly. I want that money locked away where neither my son nor his wife can ever find a single trace of it. And the power of attorney they plan to give you? I will handle that, I said, a slow, dark realization forming in my mind. But I need you to draw up a new will for me, immediately. For the next hour, we worked. We built a fortress of legal documents. We established the trust. We laid out the groundwork for the transfer of the Texas deed. When I finally stood up to leave, my knitting bag felt lighter, though it contained the same amount of yarn. "Mrs. Vance," Robert said, walking me to the door of his office. He hesitated for a moment, a rare display of uncertainty for a man in his position. "What you are going back to. It's a highly volatile environment. People who steal from their parents and plot to institutionalize them do not react well when they lose control. Be careful. If they suspect, you know." "They won't suspect a thing," I assured him, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "Matthew thinks I am a naive old woman who doesn't understand bank statements. Jessica thinks I am a decrepit nuisance who can barely operate a microwave. I am going to give them exactly what they expect." I took the train back to the suburbs. On the walk from the bus stop to the house, I stopped at a local craft store and bought 3 skeins of the cheapest, brightest yellow acrylic yarn I could find. When I finally walked through the heavy front door, it was late afternoon. The house was spotless and silent. I went straight to the kitchen, making sure my shoes scuffed loudly against the hardwood. A few minutes later, Jessica came down the stairs, still in her work clothes. She looked irritated, glancing at her Apple Watch. "You're back late," she noted, her eyes darting to the plastic craft store bag in my hand. "How was the knitting?" "Oh, it was lovely, dear," I said, letting my voice quaver just a fraction. I adopted a vacant, slightly confused smile. Though I got a bit turned around on the way back. The bus routes are so confusing these days, not like they used to be. I fumbled deliberately with the plastic bag, letting it slip from my fingers. The cheap yellow yarn spilled across her pristine marble floor. Jessica closed her eyes, letting out a long, slow exhale of pure, unfiltered exasperation. She didn't bend down to help me pick it up. "Just leave it, Eleanor. I'll get the housekeeper to sweep tomorrow," she snapped. "Matthew is on his way home. We have some paperwork we need to discuss with you tonight. About your insurance." "Paperwork?" I blinked at her, widening my eyes behind my drugstore glasses, playing the part of the bewildered elder to perfection. "Oh dear, my head always spins with those things. You know I'm not good with documents. Matthew usually handles all of that for me." A tiny, cruel smile flickered across Jessica's lips, a predator looking at trapped prey. "I know," she said smoothly, her voice returning to that sickeningly sweet tone. "Don't worry about a thing, Eleanor. We're going to take care of everything for you." "Thank you, Jessica," I whispered, turning away so she couldn't see my face. "You two are always looking out for me." I knelt down slowly, my joints popping, and began to gather the cheap yellow yarn. I kept my head bowed, hiding the fierce, cold fire burning behind my eyes. They thought they were building a cage for me. They had no idea they were already locked inside mine. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was thick with forced cheerfulness. Jessica had actually cooked, or rather she had assembled a pre-packaged meal kit of lemon herb salmon and quinoa. She poured me a glass of iced water with a slice of lemon, her lips stretched into a tight, glossy smile that didn't reach her eyes. Matthew waited until the plates were cleared before he made his move. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, cleared his throat, and reached into his leather briefcase resting by the island. He pulled out a thick manila folder and slid it across the marble counter toward me. "Mom," he began, his voice taking on that gentle, patronizing tone he used when explaining how the television remote worked. "We were talking to our accountant today. With the new year coming up, there are some changes to Medicare and your supplemental insurance. It's getting really complicated, and frankly, I don't want you stressing over bureaucratic red tape at your age." I looked at the folder, then up at my son. His eyes were wide, projecting absolute sincerity. If I hadn't heard him plotting to lock me away 24 hours earlier, I might have believed him. "Oh?" I said, letting my hand tremble slightly as I reached for the folder. "I thought my Medicare was on auto-renew." "It is, but the coverage limits are changing," Jessica chimed in smoothly, leaning against the counter. "Matt's just trying to protect you from any surprise medical bills. All you need to do is sign this designated proxy form. It just gives Matt the legal authority to talk to the insurance companies and handle your medical billing for you. so you don't have to wait on hold for hours. I opened the folder. The document inside was printed on heavy, legal-weight paper. At the very top, in bold, capitalized letters, it read, "Durable power of attorney for healthcare and property." It wasn't a simple medical proxy. It was a blank check. If I signed this, I was legally surrendering my right to make my own medical decisions, manage my own bank accounts, and determine my own living arrangements. With my signature on the bottom line, Matthew could legally sell my assets, empty my accounts, and commit me to Sunny Pines without my consent. "Goodness," I murmured, adjusting my drugstore reading glasses and squinting at the page. "The print is so small, and there are so many pages. It's just standard legal boilerplate, Mom," Matthew said, tapping a pen against the marble counter, a telltale sign of his growing impatience. "Just sign at the bottom of page 4 and page 7, and I'll take care of the rest." I picked up the pen he offered. I hovered it over the paper. I could feel Jessica holding her breath. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Then my hand gave a violent, deliberate twitch. The pen clattered out of my grip and rolled off the counter, bouncing onto the hardwood floor. "Oh my word, my arthritis is acting up terribly tonight," I gasped, massaging my right hand and offering them an apologetic, bewildered smile. "My fingers are entirely cramped, and to be honest, my eyes are so blurry I can barely make out the letters. You know how my astigmatism gets in the evening." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Mom, it'll take 2 seconds. Just try." "I don't want to mess it up and sign outside the box," I insisted, closing the folder and sliding it back toward him. "Let me look at it in the morning, Matthew. In the natural light, after I've had my tea and my joints have loosened up. I promise I'll sign it right after breakfast." Jessica let out a sharp, frustrated sigh, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. Matthew shot her a warning glance. "Fine," Matthew said, his voice clipped. "Tomorrow morning, but I need to take it to the notary by noon, Mom. Don't forget." "I won't," I promised sweetly. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, running through the timeline Robert Sterling and I had established. The next morning I was up at 6. I brewed a cup of dark coffee and brought it to the kitchen island, placing it deliberately close to the edge. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of Matthew's footsteps on the stairs. He came into the kitchen, already dressed in his suit, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, the bridge loan application is ready," Matthew was saying to whoever was on the phone. "I have the collateral secured. I'll be at the branch at 2 o'clock to finalize." He hung up, looking stressed. He walked over to his briefcase and pulled out the manila folder, setting it on the counter right next to my coffee mug. "Morning, Mom. How's the hand?" he asked briskly. "Ready to sign?" "Much better, dear," I said. I stood up, reaching for the pen. As I did, my elbow swung out. It connected solidly with the ceramic mug. The dark, scalding coffee tipped over in slow motion. It washed across the marble counter like a tidal wave, soaking instantly into the thick legal paper of the power of attorney document. The black ink immediately began to run and bleed into illegible smears. "Hey, watch out!" Matthew yelled, jumping back as the coffee dripped onto his polished shoes. Jessica, who had just walked into the kitchen, shrieked. "Look what you did, you clumsy old bat! You're ruining the floor!" I recoiled, putting both hands over my mouth, playing the part of the terrified, incompetent elder to the hilt. "Oh! Oh no, I'm so sorry, it slipped. Let me get a towel." "Don't touch it!" Matthew roared, his face turning an ugly shade of red. He grabbed the soaking wet papers, holding them up by the corners. They were completely ruined. The signature lines were obliterated by a dark brown stain. "Damn it, Mom! I had an appointment at the bank today. I need this document for the bridge loan." He had slipped. In his anger, the truth had come out. It wasn't about Medicare. He was trying to secure a bridge loan, likely for the down payment on the massive house in Oak Brook, using my clean credit history and what was left of my supposed estate as collateral. "I'm so sorry," I whimpered, shrinking back against the refrigerator. "I'll clean it up. I should just go. I'll go to my knitting club. I'll get out of your way." "Yeah, you do that," Jessica hissed, aggressively ripping paper towels from the roll. "Just go, Eleanor." I grabbed my canvas bag and practically scurried out the front door. As I walked down the driveway, the frail, panicked posture melted away from my shoulders. I stood up straight. I pulled my phone from my purse and turned it on. I had exactly 3 hours before Matthew's bank appointment. Back in the kitchen, I knew exactly what Matthew would do. He was desperate. He was in massive debt, the Oak Brook house was slipping through his fingers, and he had promised his bank manager collateral. He didn't have time to order his lawyer to draft another power of attorney. He would print a generic form from the internet. And he would forge my signature. After all, who was going to stop him? He thought I was just a senile old woman knitting scarves at the community center. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting in the immaculate, quiet sanctuary of Robert Sterling's office in downtown Chicago. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," Robert said, noting the fierce clarity in my eyes. "Are we ready?" "More than ready," I replied, taking the seat across from him. On his desk lay 3 distinct stacks of paper: the finalization of the blind trust, the authorization to accept the $8.5 million from Horizon Energy, and a series of aggressive financial injunctions. "The Horizon executives signed their portion at 8 this morning," Robert explained, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. "As soon as you sign these, the trust is officially activated. The funds will be wired into a secure corporate account by noon. Your identity will be entirely decoupled from the money." I took the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed Eleanor S. Vance with a firm, steady hand. I signed away the dusty Texas dirt, and I welcomed a fortune that would buy my freedom. "Excellent," Robert said, gathering the papers. "Now on to the defensive measures. As we discussed, I have drawn up a comprehensive credit freeze across all 3 major bureaus. Furthermore, I am initiating a high-level fraud alert attached to your Social Security number. Anyone attempting to open a line of credit, authorize a loan, or transfer assets using your identity without my firm's direct verbal authorization will trigger an immediate hard lock on the account." "Do it," I said. "Lock it all down." Robert pressed a button on his desk phone, instructing his paralegal to execute the freezes immediately. While we sat in the quiet office, miles away in the Illinois suburbs, a battered white moving van with the words Sunny Pines Facility Services painted on the side backed into Matthew and Jessica's driveway. I didn't have to be there to see it. I knew Jessica's timeline. 2 men in cheap polo shirts walked through her pristine front door. Jessica didn't offer them water. She simply pointed down the hallway to the bonus room. "Pack it all up," she would have said, checking her watch. "Just use the cheap cardboard boxes. Most of it is garbage anyway. I want the room completely cleared by the time she gets back." They would be throwing my clothes into boxes, tossing Harold's framed photographs into plastic bins, preparing to erase my existence from the house entirely, packing me away to be discarded. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Matthew walked into the First National Bank branch in Naperville. He was wearing his best suit, his hair slicked back, carrying his leather briefcase. He sat across from a loan officer named Mr. Caldwell, a serious man with wire-rimmed glasses. Matthew would have confidently slid the freshly printed forged power of attorney across the desk. He would have explained that his mother was elderly, unable to travel, and had authorized him to use her clean credit profile as a co-signer for the heavy bridge loan he desperately needed to close on the Oakbrook property. Mr. Caldwell would have nodded, taken the paper, and begun typing Matthew's and my information into his terminal. In Robert's office, my lawyer poured me a cup of Earl Grey tea from a silver pot. I took a sip. It was perfect. "The wire transfer has cleared, Mrs. Vance," Robert announced, checking his secure tablet. "The trust is funded. You are officially a very wealthy woman." "Thank you, Robert," I breathed, setting the teacup down. A massive, crushing weight lifted from my chest. I was safe. At that exact moment, at the bank in Naperville, Mr. Caldwell's computer screen flashed a bright, angry red. He stopped typing. He frowned, hitting the refresh key. The red banner remained, accompanied by a stark warning code. "Mr." Caldwell slowly looked up from his screen, his expression shifting from polite customer service to deep professional suspicion. "Is there a problem?" Matthew asked, a nervous bead of sweat forming on his forehead. "My credit score isn't an issue. My mother is the primary guarantor." "Mr. Vance," the loan officer said slowly, pushing the forged power of attorney back across the desk as if it were contaminated. "I cannot process this loan. In fact, I cannot process any transaction involving Eleanor S. Vance." Matthew's heart would have dropped into his stomach. "What? Why?" "That document gives me full authorization." "This document is irrelevant," Mr. Caldwell replied, his voice dropping to a low, stern register. "Your mother's Social Security number has just been flagged with a Level 4 identity theft and fraud alert by a Tier 1 corporate law firm in Chicago. Her credit file is completely frozen. Furthermore, The legal counsel attached to her file has explicitly flagged any power of attorney presented by immediate family members as highly suspicious. Matthew stared at the man, the blood draining completely from his face. Legal counsel? My mother doesn't have a lawyer. She's knitting at a community center. There must be a mistake in your system. There is no mistake, sir, Mr. Caldwell said, standing up. The alert was triggered 20 minutes ago. I am legally obligated to decline this loan, and I strongly advise you to take this document and leave my office immediately, before I am forced to contact Adult Protective Services to investigate potential elder financial abuse. Matthew stumbled out of the bank, his bridge loan denied, his Oak Brook house dreams shattered, and a terrifying realization dawning on him. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed Jessica. "Jess," he panicked as soon as she answered. "Did Mom sign anything before she left? Did she talk to anyone?" "What are you talking about?" Jessica snapped over the phone. "No, she spilled coffee like an idiot and left. The Sunny Pines guys are here right now. They've already boxed up half her miserable room. Did you get the loan?" "No. Her credit is locked, Jess. Frozen by a corporate law firm. They knew I was trying to use a power of attorney." Matthew's voice cracked. "She knows. Mom knows something." Jessica laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Matt, she's senile. She doesn't even know how to use the microwave. She probably fell for a phone scam and some bank locked her account. Just come home. We'll put her in the Uber to Sunny Pines tonight, take her phone, and sort the legal mess out tomorrow when she's locked in the ward." I stepped out of Robert Sterling's office building and onto the bustling Chicago street. The cold wind whipped at my coat, but I didn't feel the chill. I felt alive. I had $8.5 million, an ironclad legal shield, and the absolute certainty of what I had to do next. I didn't go back to the house. I hailed a cab and directed the driver to an upscale boutique hotel overlooking Millennium Park. I checked into a suite under my own name, using a sleek black corporate card Robert had provided, tied to the trust. I ordered a steak dinner from room service. I took a long, hot bath in a tub deep enough to submerge my aching joints, and I left my phone turned off. Let them panic. Let them stare at the cheap cardboard boxes in my empty room and wonder where the ghost had gone. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. I was going to let them sweat through the night, let them scramble to cover their tracks. And then I was going to show up for dinner. I woke up on Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving, to the sound of silence. There was no aggressive hum of a blender downstairs. There was no passive-aggressive sighing echoing through the walls. There was only the soft, muffled hum of the Chicago traffic 40 stories below my hotel window and the luxurious rustle of heavy, high-thread count sheets. I ordered room service. I didn't scurry into a freezing kitchen to drink instant coffee out of fear of being in the way. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window in a plush white robe, drinking a perfectly brewed cappuccino from a porcelain cup, and watched the morning light wash over Millennium Park. For the first time in 2 years, I was breathing oxygen that didn't feel rationed. I reached for my phone, which I had left powered off on the nightstand since leaving the bank yesterday. When I pressed the power button, the screen lit up and immediately began vibrating with the frantic energy of a trapped hornet. 47 missed calls, 18 text messages, 12 voicemails. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling remarkably detached, and tapped the voicemail icon. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. The first message was from yesterday afternoon, right around the time Matthew would have returned from his disastrous bank appointment. His voice was tight, breathless, and laced with panic. "Mom, where are you? The bank. There was a glitch or something at the bank. Your credit is locked. I need you to call me right now. They're saying some law firm flagged your file. Pick up the phone, Mom. This isn't funny." The second message, an hour later. The panic had morphed into anger. "Mom, Jessica says you left hours ago. The house is locked. Did you wander off? Do you have any idea how much stress you are causing us right now? I have a massive financial deadline today, and you are pulling some kind of vanishing act. Call me immediately." I skipped the next few. By the 8th message, left around midnight, the background noise had changed. I could hear Jessica's shrill voice in the background, yelling something about the Oak Brook house and a deposit. Matthew sounded utterly defeated. "Mom, please, I don't know what's going on. The movers came, your room is empty, and you didn't come back. Jess is furious. The Oak Brook seller is threatening to pull the contract if we don't wire the earnest money by tomorrow. I can't find you. Are you hurt? Are you at a hospital? Please, just call me. Your room is empty. They had actually done it. While I was sitting in a corner office securing my future, strangers hired by my daughter-in-law had been packing my past into cheap cardboard boxes, preparing to ship me off to Sunny Pines like discarded furniture. I deleted the voicemails. I didn't feel anger anymore. Anger requires passion, and I had no passion left for the boy I had raised. What I felt was a cold, clinical precision. The trap had been set, and I was just waiting to see how hard they would struggle when the jaws snapped shut. At 10 o'clock, there was a polite knock on my suite door. I tied my robe tighter and opened it to find Robert Sterling standing in the hallway, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," he said, stepping inside. He took in the view of the city skyline and smiled. "The suite agrees with you. You look 10 years younger today." "I feel it, Robert," I said, gesturing for him to sit on the velvet sofa. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you. I brought things we need to review." He sat down, placing his briefcase on the glass coffee table and popping the brass latches. "It seems your daughter-in-law had a very busy night." I sat across from him, crossing my legs. "Jessica? What did she do?" Robert pulled out a printed report, dense with digital timestamps and IP addresses. He adjusted his glasses. "Last night at precisely 11:40 p.m., our fraud monitoring system caught a massive red flag. Someone attempted to open an American Express Platinum credit card using your name, your date of birth, and your social security number." I stared at him, the chill returning, but this time it wasn't from a cold house. It was from pure shock. Jessica tried to steal my identity? "She didn't just try, Mrs. Vance. She executed a federal offense," Robert said grimly. "Because we had initiated the hard freeze on your credit file yesterday afternoon, the application was instantly blocked. Our cybersecurity team traced the IP address of the application directly to the Wi-Fi router registered at your son's home address." "But why?" I asked, trying to wrap my mind around the sheer arrogance of it. "She knows I have no money. She knows Matthew blew the funds from the house sale. Why open a credit card in my name?" Robert leaned forward. "Desperation makes people do remarkably stupid things. We did some digging into Matthew and Jessica's current financial status. They are severely over-leveraged. The Oak Brook house they are trying to buy requires a non-refundable earnest money deposit of $25,000 to keep the contract alive through the holiday weekend. On top of that, Jessica has hired a luxury catering company for her Thanksgiving dinner tonight, an event she is hosting to impress her corporate bosses. That catering bill was $5,000, due up front." I began to understand. The pieces clicked into place. Matthew's bridge loan was denied yesterday because I froze my credit. They had no cash. "Exactly," Robert nodded. "Their own credit cards are maxed out from maintaining their lifestyle. Without that bridge loan, they were going to lose the Oak Brook house, and the catering company was going to cancel on Thanksgiving Eve." Jessica panicked. She assumed you were just a confused old woman who had wandered off, and she assumed the law firm alert Matthew encountered at the bank was just an automated glitch. She thought she could sneak an online application through, get a digital card number instantly issued, and charge the deposit in the caterers to your name before you ever found out. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped my throat. She was going to fund her dream house and her fancy Thanksgiving party on my stolen identity, while simultaneously packing my bags for a state-run nursing home. "Yes," Robert said quietly. "It constitutes federal wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. It carries a mandatory prison sentence." I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. I thought about the hundreds of times Jessica had rolled her eyes at me, the times she had thrown away my belongings, the way she spoke to me as if I were a stray dog they had regrettably taken in. "Do we call the police?" I asked, my voice steady. "We will," Robert said, a distinct gleam of anticipation in his eye. "But perhaps not just yet, because the situation has developed another rather poetic complication." I turned back to him. "What do you mean?" Robert smiled, a genuine predator's smile. "As the trustee for your new blind trust, I had a conference call early this morning with the senior partners at Sterling Vance Brokerage, Jessica's employers. The Horizon Energy deal is officially closed. The money is resting safely in your corporate accounts. The brokerage firm, consequently, just secured a multi-million-dollar commission. They are ecstatic." I imagine they are. The senior partner, Richard Bradley, was practically weeping with joy on the phone. Robert continued. During our chat, I casually mentioned that I would be staying in the Chicago suburbs for the Thanksgiving holiday. Richard immediately insisted that I join him for dinner tonight. He said one of his rising star managers was hosting a lavish Thanksgiving networking event at her home, and he desperately wanted to introduce me, the representative of their most lucrative anonymous client, to the team. I stopped breathing for a second. He invited you to Jessica's house? He did, Robert confirmed, his eyes sparkling. Jessica has turned her Thanksgiving dinner into a massive celebration for the firm. She believes that because she worked on the periphery of the Horizon Energy account, this windfall will secure her a promotion to vice president. She has invited the senior partners, the Millers, the top executives. She wants to prove she can run with the big dogs. She has no idea, I whispered, pressing my hand to my mouth as a profound sense of awe washed over me. She has no idea that the anonymous millionaire she is celebrating is me. And she has no idea that the VIP lawyer she is trying to impress is the man who holds the evidence of her federal felony. None whatsoever, Robert said, closing his briefcase. I accepted the invitation under my professional title, Mr. Sterling, corporate trustee. She expects a wealthy, connected lawyer. She expects a night of triumph. The only question remaining, Mrs. Vance, is what you want to do. I stood up. I walked over to the mirror hanging above the credenza. I looked at the woman in the reflection. The gray hair that I had let grow out because Jessica said salon visits were a waste of the household budget. The pale skin, the slumped shoulders of a woman who had spent 2 years apologizing for taking up space. I have spent my entire life being polite, Robert, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet suite. I was polite when they moved me into a closet. I was polite when they stole my husband's legacy. I was polite when they tried to lock me away. I turned to face him. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. It's a day for family. I think it's only right that I attend my son's dinner. Robert stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. I will have a car waiting for you at 6 o'clock, Mrs. Vance. I spent Wednesday afternoon doing something I had not done in 40 years. I spent money on myself, and I didn't look at the price tags. I walked down the magnificent mile, the crisp November wind biting at my cheeks, but I felt invincible. I walked into a high-end salon on Oak Street. I didn't ask for a trim. I asked for a transformation. 2 hours later, the tired, yellowish-gray frizz was gone, replaced by a sleek, sophisticated silver bob that framed my face with sharp, elegant precision. Next, I went to the boutiques. I walked past the sensible, discounted department stores where I had shopped my entire life and stepped into the hushed, carpeted sanctuaries of designer fashion. I bought a tailored, deep burgundy cashmere coat that draped over my shoulders like royalty. I bought a perfectly fitted cream silk blouse and tailored black trousers that smoothed out the lines of my age and replaced them with authority. I bought Italian leather boots that clicked against the pavement, a sound that commanded attention, entirely unlike the shuffling of my old slippers. When I looked in the three-way mirror in the dressing room, the woman looking back at me was a stranger. No, that wasn't right. She wasn't a stranger. She was the woman Harold had always told me I was, buried beneath years of sacrifice, motherhood, and ultimately abuse. She was Eleanor S. Vance, and she was worth $8.5 million. By the time the black town car pulled up to the curb of the hotel at 6 o'clock on Thanksgiving evening, the sun had set. The city was glowing with holiday lights. The driver, a professional man in a dark suit, opened the rear door for me. I slid into the plush leather seat, my cashmere coat wrapped around me, feeling a profound, terrifying calm. The drive to the suburbs took an hour. As we merged onto the highway, I watched the city skyline fade into the sprawling, manicured subdivisions of Illinois. I thought about the first Thanksgiving I had spent in Matthew's house. I had spent 12 hours in the kitchen, roasting a 20-pound turkey, making my grandmother's stuffing, baking 3 different pies. Jessica had complained that the stuffing had too many carbs and had ordered her friends to eat the organic kale salad instead. Matthew hadn't said a word to defend me. I had eaten my dinner in the kitchen, washing their plates while they drank wine in the dining room. Not tonight. Tonight, I was not the hired help. I was the storm they didn't see coming. The town car turned onto their affluent, tree-lined street. Even from a block away, I could see that Jessica had pulled out all the stops. The house was brilliantly illuminated. Spotlights highlighted the landscaping. The driveway and the curb were packed with luxury vehicles, Mercedes, BMWs, a Porsche. Richard Bradley and the senior partners of the brokerage firm had arrived. "Right here is fine, driver," I said softly. The heavy car rolled to a stop at the end of the driveway. The driver quickly got out and opened my door. The freezing November air hit my face, crisp and sharp. I stepped out of the car. I stood on the edge of the manicured lawn, looking up at the massive front door. Inside, I could hear the faint sound of classical music and the low, confident hum of wealthy people congratulating themselves. Inside, my son was likely sweating through his suit, terrified of where I was, while his wife preened for her bosses, ignorant of the financial guillotine hanging over her neck. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse. I smoothed the lapels of my cashmere coat. I lifted my chin, taking one last deep breath of the freezing air. Then, I began the walk up the driveway. I did not tiptoe. I did not stick to the edges of the concrete. My leather boots struck the pavement with slow, deliberate, heavy steps. I reached the front door. I didn't use my key. I reached out and pressed the doorbell, listening to the deep, resonant chime echo through the halls of the house that had once been my prison. The door began to open. The heavy front door swung open. Matthew stood in the foyer. He was wearing a sharply tailored navy suit, a crystal cocktail glass in his hand. He had the strained, plastered-on smile of a man who was simultaneously hosting a high-stakes corporate party and quietly panicking about a looming financial disaster. His eyes swept over me. They moved from the expensive Italian leather boots, up the tailored black trousers, across the perfectly draped burgundy cashmere coat, and finally rested on my new, sharp silver hair. He didn't recognize me. Not for the first 3 seconds. He opened his mouth, likely to welcome a late-arriving corporate guest, before his brain finally processed the features of the woman standing on his porch. "Mom?" The word slipped out of his mouth as a choked gasp. The cocktail glass in his hand tipped, spilling a splash of amber liquid onto the hardwood. "Hello, Matthew," I said. My voice was smooth, devoid of the anxious quaver I had used for the last 2 years. "I apologize for being late. The traffic from the city was dreadful." Before he could respond, the sharp click of heels echoed from the hallway. Jessica appeared behind him, wearing a stunning emerald green cocktail dress, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. "Matt, who's at the door? Is it the regional director?" She peered over his shoulder. When she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her eyes widened, darting frantically over my clothes, the coat, the hair. "Eleanor, where have you been? We've been calling you all day. We thought you wandered off." "I didn't wander off, Jessica," I said, stepping gracefully over the threshold and into the warm, brightly lit foyer. I didn't wait for an invitation. "I had errands to run, and I wouldn't miss Thanksgiving dinner. You told me the Millers and your senior partners were coming. I wanted to look my best." "What are you wearing?" Jessica hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper as she grabbed my elbow, trying to pull me toward the hallway that led to the garage. "You can't be here right now. Richard Bradley, the senior managing partner, is in my living room. This is the most important night of my career. Your room is packed. Just go upstairs and hide in the guest bath until they leave." I looked down at her hand gripping my cashmere sleeve. I didn't pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she felt the sheer, freezing weight of my gaze and slowly let go. "My room is full of cheap cardboard boxes, Jessica," I said evenly, "and I have no intention of hiding in a bathroom." I walked past them both, shedding my cashmere coat and draping it over the banister, before turning the corner and stepping into the sprawling, sunken living room. It was a scene of calculated opulence. A roaring fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Waitstaff hired from the luxury catering company moved seamlessly through the crowd of about 20 people, offering silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. The room hummed with the sophisticated chatter of Chicago's corporate elite. And standing right by the fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling water, was Robert Sterling. He caught my eye. A microscopic, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth before he turned his attention back to the man he was speaking with, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and an expensive watch. Richard Bradley, Jessica's boss. Matthew and Jessica hurried into the room behind me, hovering like anxious prison guards. Jessica forced a bright, desperate laugh. "Richard!" Jessica called out, steering herself toward the fireplace, trying to physically block me from her boss's line of sight. "I hope you're trying the crab cakes. The caterer is phenomenal." Richard Bradley smiled warmly at her. "They are excellent, Jessica. You've outdone yourself. Beautiful home, wonderful food." His eyes drifted past her, landing on me. "And who is this elegant woman? I don't believe we've been introduced." The silence that fell over Matthew and Jessica was absolute. They were trapped. They couldn't dismiss me as the senile old mother in front of the CEO without looking incredibly cruel, especially when I was dressed in clothes that cost more than Jessica's emerald gown. This is my mother, Eleanor," Matthew stammered, stepping forward, his face flushed with a dark, panicked red. "She's been staying with us." "Eleanor Vance," I said, stepping around Jessica and extending my hand to Richard. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Richard. Jessica speaks of you often." "The pleasure is entirely mine, Eleanor," Richard said, taking my hand. "You have a lovely home here with your son." "Oh, it's not my home," I corrected smoothly, my voice carrying clearly over the soft jazz playing on the speakers. "I was just a guest, in the bonus room, but I am moving to a new property tomorrow." "Really?" Richard asked politely. "Staying in the area?" "Not quite," I smiled. Jessica interrupted, her voice shrill and trembling. Dinner is served, everyone. Let's move to the dining room." She practically herded the guests toward the massive, beautifully set dining table. There were place cards. Naturally, there wasn't one for me. Without missing a beat, I walked to the head of the table, picked up Matthew's place card, moved it to a side chair, and sat down in the host's seat. Matthew looked like he was going to be sick, but he didn't dare cause a scene in front of Richard Bradley. He silently took the side chair. The catered dinner began. I ate methodically, savoring the expensive wine Jessica had bought with her maxed-out credit cards. The conversation flowed around the table, mostly consisting of the junior executives flattering Richard and praising Jessica's hosting skills. Finally, dessert was cleared and coffee was poured. This was the moment Jessica had orchestrated the entire night for. She stood up, tapping her spoon gently against her crystal wine glass. The room quieted down. She looked radiant, confident, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing on a trapdoor. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," Jessica began, her voice ringing out with practiced corporate warmth. "Thanksgiving is about family, but it's also about recognizing the people who support our professional dreams. This has been an incredible quarter for Sterling Vance Brokerage. And today we officially closed the Horizon Energy acquisition, the largest single land deal our division has seen in a decade." A murmur of applause rippled around the table. As one of the senior managers who helped lay the groundwork for the corporate gala side of that account, Jessica continued, looking directly at Richard, "I just want to say how proud I am of this firm. We make millionaires, and we build the future." "Well said, Jessica," Richard beamed, raising his glass. "And it's quite fitting that we have Mr. Robert Sterling here with us tonight. As the trustee and legal counsel for the anonymous seller in that very transaction, Robert was the architect of the deal. To Robert, and to a very wealthy, very mysterious client." The table raised their glasses. "Hear, hear." I did not raise my glass. I placed my linen napkin on the table and folded my hands. "Yes," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a sharp, cutting clarity that sliced through the celebratory chatter. "Let's talk about the Horizon Energy acquisition." Every head at the table turned toward me. Jessica's smile froze. "Eleanor, please. This is business." "I am aware," I said, looking directly at Richard Bradley. 40 acres of arid scrubland in Culberson County, Texas. Parcel ID number 884-902. Sold for $8.5 million. Paid in full this morning to a blind trust. Richard Bradley lowered his glass. His distinguished face shifted from polite indulgence to absolute shock. He looked at me, then looked sharply at Robert Sterling, who was calmly sipping his coffee at the other end of the table. "How do you know the parcel ID?" Richard asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "That information is strictly confidential under the non-disclosure agreement." She's confused, Richard. I'm so sorry." Matthew jumped up from his chair, reaching for my arm. "Mom, you need to go upstairs right now. You're having an episode." "Don't touch me, Matthew," I commanded. I didn't raise my voice, but the absolute authority in my tone made him freeze in his tracks. He dropped his hand. I turned back to Richard. "I know the parcel ID, Richard, because my late husband bought that land 40 years ago from a magazine advertisement. I know the sale price because I signed the authorization documents in Robert's office this morning." The dining room descended into a silence so profound it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Jessica stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting frantically between me and Robert. That's impossible. You're lying. You don't have a dime. Matthew told me. Robert, I said calmly, would you please clarify the situation for my daughter-in-law? Robert Sterling stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, transforming instantly from a polite dinner guest into a lethal corporate attorney. Jessica, Matthew, Robert said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Allow me to formally introduce my client, the sole beneficiary of the Horizon Energy Trust, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. A collective gasp echoed from the junior executives at the table. Richard Bradley looked at Jessica, his eyes narrowing with a dangerous, sudden realization of the dynamic playing out in front of him. No, Matthew breathed, collapsing back into his chair, his hands gripping his hair. No, the bank. The law firm alert. Yes, Matthew, I said softly, turning my gaze to my son. The bank. Did you really think you could forge my signature on a power of attorney and steal the rest of my life, just like you stole your father's legacy? Stole? Richard Bradley asked, his voice dropping an octave. Eleanor, stop it! Jessica shrieked, all pretense of corporate elegance vanishing. She looked feral. You're ruining my dinner. You're ruining my career. You ruined it yourself, Jessica, I said, standing up from the head of the table. I looked at the crowd of horrified executives. 2 years ago, when my husband died, my son convinced me to sell our family home. He told me he was putting the $150,000 in equity into a secure investment fund for my retirement. Instead, he wired $85,000 to the Grand Victoria Casino to pay off a gambling debt and spent $60,000 buying the white Audi sitting in the driveway right now. Matthew buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, broken sob. I was moved into a back room, I continued, my voice steady, fueled by 2 years of suppressed grief. I was treated like an unwanted stray. And last night, I listened to them plot to commit me to Sunny Pines, a state-run facility for the indigent, so they could sell this house, cover his debts, and buy a mansion in Oak Brook. Good God, one of the executives muttered, setting his wine glass down as if it were poisoned. Jessica was shaking violently. You're a crazy old woman. You have no proof of any of this. Matthew, say something. Defend us. Actually, Jessica, she has entirely documented proof of the wire transfers. Robert Sterling interjected, stepping out from behind his chair. But that is a civil matter. What brings me here tonight, aside from Mrs. Vance's invitation, is a criminal one. Robert reached into the breast pocket of his suit and pulled out a folded legal document. He walked around the table and placed it directly on Jessica's plate, right on top of her half-eaten pumpkin pie. What is this? She whispered, shrinking back from the paper. Last night, at 11:40 p.m., someone used an IP address originating from this house to apply for an American Express Platinum card using Eleanor Vance's Social Security number, Robert stated clearly. Attempting to fund the deposit on your Oak Brook property and the catering bill for this very dinner, Richard Bradley stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Identity theft? Federal wire fraud and elder financial exploitation, Robert corrected. Because Mrs. Vance's credit was frozen by my firm hours earlier, the application was blocked and flagged. The authorities have been notified, Jessica. They will be formally investigating the digital footprint tomorrow. Jessica stared at the document, her chest heaving. The emerald dress suddenly looked ridiculous on her. She looked at Richard Bradley, tears of absolute panic welling in her eyes. Richard, please. It's a misunderstanding. I'm a senior manager. You are suspended, Richard said, his voice cold and flat. He looked at her with pure disgust. Effective immediately. Do not come to the office on Monday. HR will contact you regarding the termination of your contract. He turned to me, his expression softening into one of deep respect. Mrs. Vance, I cannot apologize enough that you had to endure this in the presence of my firm. If there is anything Sterling Vance can do to assist Mr. Sterling in this matter, you have my full cooperation. Thank you, Richard. Enjoy your evening, I said graciously. I looked down at Matthew, my only child, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the man who had sold my future for chips at a blackjack table. He was openly weeping now, looking up at me with red, terrified eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry, he choked out, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back out of his reach. I was drowning. The debts. I didn't know what to do. Please don't leave me like this. I'm your son. I'm your only family. I'm your heir." "You were," I corrected him gently. The dining room was completely silent. Even Jessica had stopped crying, staring at me in horror. "I drafted a new will yesterday, Matthew," I told him, making sure my voice carried to the deepest corners of his conscience. "The $8.5 million will be held in a private trust. When I die, it will be donated to a charity supporting elderly widows who have been financially abused by their families." Matthew's mouth opened in a silent scream of agony. "However," I added softly, "I did leave you something. I included a standard no-contest clause in the will. I left you exactly $1. Matthew blinked, uncomprehending. Robert translated for him. "By leaving you $1, Matthew, Mrs. Vance proves to the probate court that she did not forget you in her old age, and she is fully sound of mind. It legally bars you from ever contesting the will. You get nothing." I turned my back on the table. I didn't look at Jessica's ruined face or Matthew's trembling hands. I walked out of the dining room, my steps ringing clearly against the hardwood floor. I retrieved my cashmere coat from the banister. As I slipped it over my shoulders, I looked around the foyer of the house one last time. It was still freezing, but it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't my house. I opened the front door and stepped out into the crisp, cold November night. The black town car was idling at the curb, the driver standing by the open door. I walked down the driveway, leaving the screams, the tears, and the wreckage of their greed behind me. I climbed into the back of the car, sinking into the warm leather. "Where to, Mrs. Vance?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "I bought a little house on a lake in Michigan yesterday," I said, a genuine warm smile spreading across my face for the first time in years. "Take me home."